Battlefield 1 launched in 2016, and for many of us, it set a new standard in first-person shooters. But nearly 9 years later, is it still worth playing in 2025? Let's dive in and find out. I can hardly believe that this game came out nearly 9 years ago. Back then, I was living on the other side of the world without a fancy or flashy PC. I originally played Battlefield 1 on Xbox, and now after crossing over to the dark side of PC gaming, I decided to give it another go. In this video, I'll break this down into several sections, and I'll leave chapters along below so you can easily follow along. Let's start with gameplay and mechanics. The multiplayer features large-scale maps with 64 player lobbies, and for me it strikes a perfect balance between the games we see today, where either the maps are too big with no action, or too small and chaotic. I've always felt that the older style Battlefield games manage this balance perfectly, although recent releases have veered off in a different direction, but we won't be discussing that today. Whilst Battlefield 1 is not totally historically accurate, it does do a good job of semi-educating the player while still keeping the experience fun and engaging. The weapons and class systems are not faction specific, meaning that you can use British weapons as the Germans and vice versa. Though it's not historically accurate, this approach does ensure that no team has a major advantage in terms of weaponry, so promoting a fairer and balanced gameplay experience for all. In addition, the game does offer a variety of vehicles, from tanks to cars to planes and even horses. They're enjoyable to use, but they can feel a bit janky compared to some of the modern games that have refined vehicle mechanics. And of course, my favourite feature in the Battlefield series, the destructible environments. To this day, I don't think that any game has quite matched the Battlefield franchise in terms of building destruction. They really do lead the way in this aspect. So overall, in terms of mechanics and gameplay, I still believe that for a nearly 10-year-old game, Battlefield 1 plays just as well, if not better, than some of the modern releases. Okay, so let's move on to matchmaking and player base. This is where I feel the game can feel a little bit flawed, and it may not be worth the investment for everyone. Depending on where you're located, there can be a lack of servers. For instance, in Australia, there are only a few servers, if not a couple of servers available, and these fill up incredibly quickly. As a result, you might find yourself stuck in long queue times, or playing on servers with significantly higher ping. However, if you're patient or open to playing on other servers, it can still be worth it. One of the main reasons why I remember giving up Battlefield 1 was due to the server population dropping off, especially with the operations mode that I loved. As servers became less populated, I'd often find myself in empty lobbies, which really killed the experience. Operations are still playable, but only through server browser, which means you can't pick specific operations to join, which is a bit of a downside. Additionally, I have encountered a bit of a weird issue when trying to join an operation the old way, where the screen kind of distorts into a loop, forcing me to restart the game. I'm unsure whether this is an issue with the game, or whether it's something to do with my PC, but despite trying multiple fixes, the problem still persists. Of course, the most common and recognisable mode is Battlefield's signature Conquest mode, and you'll be pleased to know there are plenty of servers for this, so you're much more likely to jump into a game here. If you're after conquest action or random operations, you're in luck, as the matchmaking is a lot more reliable for these. However, if you are hoping to specifically play certain maps or targeted operations, you may struggle a bit with the matchmaking system. So in short, if you're flexible with your game modes, you'll easily find matches, but if you're particular about what you want to play, it might be a bit more difficult to get the match that you're after. Let's talk about graphics and performance. Battlefield 1 still looks amazing, even almost a decade later. The explosions, building destruction, and all-out chaos of war really hold up visually. It's a real treat to watch, and if you disable certain HUD elements like crosshairs, it amps up the immersion even more, and you really feel like you're in the middle of the action. Performance wise, it runs super smooth for me. I'm hitting a solid 200 frames per second on ultra settings without any issues, which is great, and it's definitely not hard on the system, and the game just glides along in multiplayer. I will leave my specs below in the description so you can compare how it will run on something similar. The audio is equally impressive, and the sounds of battle along with the screams of your teammates really add to the atmosphere and make the whole thing that much more intense. That said, I have had a couple of crashes, specifically with a DXGI error during a cutscene in the Friends in High Places campaign mission. I did some digging on this, and it turns out that it is a pretty common issue with Battlefield and EA games in general. Most people generally fix it by disabling DX12 and using DX11 instead, but for me I found that the opposite worked, turning DX12 on and disabling DX11. Since then I haven't had any crashes, but it's definitely something to be aware of if you're planning on hopping back in. So performance wise, there are some hiccups out there, but it doesn't seem to affect everyone. It's kind of hit or miss, so just keep that in mind if you do run into any issues. Moving on to content, when it comes to multiplayer, as I mentioned earlier, the variety and quality aren't quite what they used to be when Battlefield 1 first launched across all platforms. This is mainly because the server populations have dropped, which can make it harder to find specific game modes or maps. That said, there are still plenty of servers with solid map rotations and different game modes, but the downside is they tend to fill up quickly, and if you're after a particular mode or map, you might find yourself playing on servers with higher ping, or you could be waiting in long queues. On the other hand, when it comes to single player, I absolutely love the campaign mode, specifically the war stories. The 6 different stories, each focusing on a character from a different country, are a fantastic way to experience the war from various perspectives. For me, this was one of the truly last great single player campaigns, and even now I still think it holds up really well. The stories are immersive and definitely replayable, especially if you have certain missions or characters that you enjoy. The campaign offers a nice variety too, from infantry combat to tank battles, aerial dogfights, and plenty of environments from mountains, deserts, beaches, and of course trench warfare. However, like I mentioned earlier, if you're one of the unlucky ones to run into the DXGI crashes or any bugs, it could really mess with your experience. If you can't fix it, some missions may end up becoming unplayable, which is a real bummer. So it's definitely something to keep in mind if you're planning to dive into the campaign. But overall, the content is still really relevant, fun, and absolutely worth playing in my opinion. It's definitely got a lot to offer if you're into solo campaigns. So the big question, is it worth the price, and is it good value for money? Right now, there's a huge spring sale on Steam with Battlefield titles going for 90 to 95% off, meaning you can score Battlefield 1 for just $2. An absolute steal, and at that price, it's a no-brainer. However, if you are looking at the full price, which is around 50 Australian dollars, it's definitely something you need to consider. While the game does still hold up well compared to some newer titles, the risk of annoying crashes and the limitations in finding specific modes or maps makes it harder to justify paying full price. For me, I personally wouldn't recommend paying full price for it, given some of the issues that it has. If, however, you're thinking about picking it up, I'd definitely say to wait for a sale like the one happening now, or hold out for the next one. At a discounted price, it's definitely worth it, but at full price, it's harder to recommend. So, leaving you with my final thoughts, is it still worth playing in 2025? Well, I think it absolutely is. The gameplay remains fast paced, challenging, and most importantly, a lot of fun. The campaign is easily one of the best I've played, and honestly, I think that in itself is worth it alone. Sure, there are a few issues here and there, but if you can snag it during a sale, it's definitely worth picking up. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If there are any other older games that you'd like me to dive into and cover, drop a comment below. Also, if you're still playing Battlefield in 2025, let me know how you're finding it. Until then, take care and keep it crispy.